All we've got to do now is to start pumping.
What is going on, everybody? Happy Thursday, and welcome to the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I am your host, Marcus Whitman, and today, Carson Wentz on the move. West, right? West, east, north, southwest, southwest? I think it's southwest. On the move to Indianapolis. What a trade. We got our reactions ahead for that. Along with that, an exciting show because I'm going to be doing my 2019 NFL Draft regrades, taking a look at my analysis of that draft from 2 years ago and kind of reflecting on what I had said about that draft and how it transpired. So that's going to be really fun. And then we'll get into the mailbag, answer some of your questions for the show. Before we do get started, I do want to remind you that this show is brought to you by my Patreon. That is patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy, where you can not just support the show, but become a part of it by gaining access to the aforementioned mailbag. But not just that, if you enjoy my draft content, my mock drafts, my top 10 positional breakdowns, you will love my Patreon. We've got dozens of film breakdowns already up on those prospects coming up for the 21 NFL Draft, as well my comprehensive NFL draft board with player evaluations, grades, pro comps, you name it. Every player that I have evaluated, you can just load up that document and see my opinion on that player. And come draft night, you'll have a whole pool of like 500 players to look at what my scouting notes were on that player. So if you enjoy my draft content, you will love the TFG Draft Insider Package there on Patreon. You support the show in the process. You support the channel. So thank you in advance for checking that out. And for those that have signed up, your support has been amazing, and I can't thank you enough. So for those that have signed up recently, shout out to you guys. Amazing for the support you're showing me. Really does allow me to do the things I do. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Let's go ahead and talk some football. Carson Wentz traded to Indianapolis. Really the reason I'm doing a show this week. I'm heading down to Illinois to spend some time with my fiance's family down there. So I wasn't sure I was going to get a podcast up. I was originally just going to do an exclusive draft grades video, but then this thing shook down, and I was like, all right, I gotta react, right? I gotta break this thing down because this is league changing. This changes the future landscape of two organizations in the NFL. This is really exciting stuff. So Carson Wentz traded to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick this year and a future, not compensatory pick, a future conditional pick, which is a second-round pick, but if Wentz plays 75% of the team's offensive snaps next year, it is going to be a first-round pick. And, man, like I said, this changes the landscape of both organizations, and I'm going to start just from the Colts perspective, and then we'll get into the Eagles perspective. But over the last month or so, as it's been floated back and forth on if Wentz was going to get traded, I've been taking the stance that's been an unpopular stance, by the way, for some reason, that whoever acquires Carson Wentz is going to walk away a winner in the trade because the quarterback market is very, very thin right now. And yeah, Carson Wentz just last year was not good. There was about 6-7 games last year where he looked like a garbage can playing quarterback, and I get that. There is a chance that you're acquiring that, and that's why he didn't end up costing a first-round pick this year. That's why it is a conditional pick to be a first-round pick next year. So I understand all of that, but look at the teams that didn't trade for Carson Wentz and ask yourself, who's better off at quarterback moving forward, the Colts or the Bears? The Colts or the Washington football team? The Colts or the New England Patriots? And now that it's done, I think people are finally realizing, like, okay, yeah, actually it does make a lot of sense to trade for Carson Wentz, who, excluding his rookie season, has played, 4 years, or if you just want to include his rookie season where he was not that bad, let's say 4 out of his 5 years he's been a top 20 quarterback. I would say 2 out of those 5, he's been a top 10 quarterback. One of those, he was an MVP candidate. Last year was ugly, absolutely ugly, but he just turned 28. He's worked with Frank Reich, who was his offensive coordinator when he was playing at that MVP level. He's got all these athletic traits, and he's going to come in with this breath of fresh air and this chip on his shoulder mentality. And I think you're going to get a top 15 quarterback in the building with weekly elite upside. Now, you might get some stinkers. It just might be the case. Carson Wentz just isn't going to have the consistency to be an elite quarterback. And, that's actually fine if you're the Colts. Because, yeah, he might not be an elite quarterback. You might not be trading for Patrick Mahomes or, Deshaun Watson here. But at least you don't have to start Jacoby Brissett. At least you don't have to start Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's just a less explosive version of Carson Wentz, who's going to give you that weekly variance. Like I said, would you rather be in the Colts' shoes with a dart throw at a potential Super Bowl winning quarterback like Carson Wentz, who's played at an MVP level with your current offense coordinator? Or would you rather be the Chicago Bears sitting there with the 20th pick and Nick Foles as your quarterback with a great defense saying, like, what the hell are we doing at quarterback? At least the Colts recognized that you got to take chances if you want to be great in this league. It's like the theme of this podcast at this point. The Colts very well may be going to the Super Bowl if Carson Wentz works out, because they were that quarterback away. You know who's not going to the Super Bowl next year? Washington football team. I'm sorry, Taylor Heineke ain't going to take you to the Super Bowl next year. The Bears. Yeah, Nick Foles, Jacoby Brissett, Andy Dalton. Sorry, he's not taking you to the Super Bowl next year. The Broncos. I don't think Drew Lock is going to turn the corner and take you to the Super Bowl next year. Maybe he does. He's kind of a different situation. The Patriots. Maybe Mac Jones becomes Tom Brady and he gets you there. But man, if you're the Indianapolis Colts, you at least have upside at that quarterback position that could give you that quarterback that can make you an elite team. He really does have that upside, and I believe that he can turn things around. Now, people want to focus on last year. I have been very honest over the last 2 seasons, not just last year, that Doug Peterson had to go. His play calling was just abhorrent. Like, no team in the NFL had less of a clue what the hell was going on schematically than the Philadelphia Eagles over the last 2 years. And I don't put that on Carson Wentz. I put that on Doug Peterson. Like, the amount of times that people were just doing the wrong stuff, like the most simple stuff. It was like an elementary school play where the kids are coming out and they're saying the wrong lines, wearing the wrong costumes. That's what the Philadelphia Eagles have looked like offensively under Doug Peterson for the last 2 years. The Indianapolis Colts are the opposite. They are a well-run machine. And Carson Wentz, it's going to be just a breath of fresh air to come in and be like, all right, we have a system in place. I have a sound offensive line that understands what's going on. We're all on the same page with our offensive coordinator here. My receivers are running the right routes. And now I can focus on myself instead of trying to be the hero here and save all of this. Because if you look at what he did in 2019, where he was actually pretty special, that Eagles team had no business going to the playoffs. So this is just a season ago. Carson Wentz had some spectacular games and, in my opinion, really got them into the playoffs and out of a lot of ruts and out of a lot of trouble. And then that just reached like the worst case scenario in 2020. So I do believe there's a decent chance that Carson Wentz figures things back out and comes into Indianapolis. Now, yeah, there's some accuracy concerns. There's, he's not the quickest at getting rid of the football. I do think Frank Reich will work with him on a lot of that stuff. They did a great job with Andrew Luck. Kind of speeding up how quickly he got rid of the ball. And I think they'll take a similar approach with Carson Wentz with this new offense that they have here. So, yeah, he's got some problems. He will play some hero ball at times. There might be weeks where he just doesn't have it, where he doesn't have his fastball and his accuracy downfield is off, or he fumbles the ball, holding onto the ball too long. That might happen. But you know what also might happen? You still win 10, 11, 12 games despite him laying some of those stinkers, and then you get into the playoffs and you get the good version of Carson Wentz that was still out there in a few games last year. Pittsburgh, San Francisco, the Cleveland game, kind of right before he got benched. There was some games in there where Carson Wentz still looked like his old self, but it was the bad games that people want to focus on. So for me, for the Colts, you get the upside of quarterback that the other teams that were in this quarterback market are sitting there like twirling their thumbs saying like, okay, do we have to draft Kyle Trask now, the 6th best quarterback in this class, who's definitely not a first round prospect? Meanwhile, you're sitting here with at least optimism and a chance at greatness. Yeah, the Colts said it could have signed Jameis Winston or Ryan Fitzpatrick. All these names I've heard floated out there for the Colts, and I'm just like scratching my head, literally saying, how as a fan of the Colts, who like you just had your decent year, right? You're not a team like the Browns who were happy to just get back into the playoffs. No offense, Browns fans, your expectations are changing moving forward, but the Colts as an organization, the Colts fans shouldn't be sitting there saying, how can we win 10 games to get into the playoffs and lose to the Bills again? That shouldn't be what the Colts are thinking. They should be thinking, what can we do to beat the Bills next year, to beat the Chiefs? And Carson Wentz, if you can get back what he was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what he's been the majority of his career, and not last year that was just a complete disaster in Philadelphia, you have a chance to do those things. So I love this move for the Colts. And the beauty is they played the long game here. They played the market super well. They kind of hedged their bets that other teams weren't going to trade first-round picks this year, which sounds like it did not happen. They hung in there. They played hardball, and they got a steal of a trade. This is another thing that is underrated about this, is the Colts, from a front office point of view here, really maximize the value here by letting the market play out. And that future pick, I do think in all reality, it does end up being the Colts' first-round pick next year. But here's the beauty. If this isn't working out and Carson Wentz really is broken, you think they're going to be able to know that by week 10, week 11? Yeah, I do. And there's no way they're going to keep playing him if they're really struggling and he's not the guy. Well, then you go to Jacob Eason, who at that point will have had plenty of time to develop. You spent a, third, fourth round pick on him last year. He's got a rocket arm. You go to Jacob Eason, see what he's got, and they have no money tied to Carson Wentz. They can just cut Carson Wentz. This is like the dream, basically high-risk, low-reward trade for the Colts to get a chance, even if he doesn't work out. We're going to do my draft grades here later in this show, and a lot of the quarterback grades I give B's and A's because the risk is worth the reward. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but finding that quarterback is so important in the NFL. And if this thing doesn't work out, you lose a third-round pick this year, whatever. The Colts are an amazing drafting team. A fifth-round pick for the Colts is like a third-round pick for most teams with the way they draft. And, you lose a second-round pick next year. The Dolphins lost a second-round pick to take a chance on Josh Rosen. No one even remembers that. So it's going to be like nothing if this doesn't work out. And that the final point I want to make here about the Colts is something I've heard a lot out there is, how do you take on that contract? How do you take on Carson Wentz's massive $34 million a year contract? He's not that player. Hello? You don't pay that if you're the Colts. You pay him $22 million per year for the next 3 seasons. If this works out, not only did you get a top 15 quarterback with weekly elite upside on a bargain for your picks, you're getting him on a bargain contract, and he's not going to have a whole lot of leverage to sit there and demand a restructure, at least within the next year and a half. So the Colts don't acquire this massive overpay that the Eagles had. The Eagles actually have to eat $34 million in dead cap, and the Colts have no financial ties to him other than his base salary. So, no, the Colts aren't overpaying for Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is going to be paid like a bottom 10 starting quarterback. He's getting paid like Teddy Bridgewater next year. So this is all around just a slam dunk for the Colts. There was Colts fans that didn't want to do this, and I've been trying to tell you for 2 weeks, this is about as best case scenario for the Colts as it was going to get. Maybe trading for Sam Darnold would have been better, but we don't actually know if the Colts or if the Jets want to do that at this point in time. So I would go get Carson Wentz, who's played much better football than Sam Darnold. It's really a win-win-win-win-win for the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm super stoked for the Colts next year. I think that this puts them right in the race with the the Chiefs and the Ravens and all these top teams, the Bills. Now it could flop, but we just talked about how quickly they'll be able to move on from it if it flops. So, unbelievable move for the Colts. If there's any Colts fans complaining about this, I really want to know why. Like, why? Because I have seen that. I want to know why you don't like this. Like, did you really want to sign Jameis Winston and win 9-10 games and just wait till he has a bad game in the playoffs and then be sitting in the same exact position next year? Like, I don't get why people were so against trading for Carson Wentz. So I think this is an amazing move for the Colts. A++ trade. This just shocks up my excitement for the Colts for next year. So I'm cheering for Carson Wentz, especially as someone that's kind of stand the idea that this was a good move. And sure enough, after it happened on Twitter, I saw some much more positive tweets as opposed to before it happened, when the consensus was, oh my God, how could you trade for Carson Wentz? He was a garbage can at quarterback last year. Yeah, it's not just about last year. You know, players have down years, especially when their team is a big of a mess as the Eagles were last year. So great on the Colts. Now let's talk this from the Eagles' perspective, where it's a lot more head-scratching to me. And the only reason this makes any sense for the Eagles to me is this really must have become a toxic environment between Wentz, with Jalen Hurts there, and the front office and the new coaching staff. It really must have been a situation where they're like, we just kind of want to move on. Like, it's just not working. Almost like when they fired Andy Reid in a lot of ways. We've had some fun, but there's clashing mentalities, and it's just not working. That's the only thing that can really explain this for me, because there's just so many things wrong with this move for the Eagles that leaves kind of a skid mark on this whole situation here for the Eagles. And while my hype for the Eagles is going up and skyrocketing, it's really going in the different direction for the Eagles. So I don't even know, like, so they're going to go with Jalen Hurts now moving forward. They have the 6th pick. They have an extra 3rd-round pick. So they don't now have this immense draft capital probably to move up. I mean, maybe Atlanta isn't thinking Fields, and you could, swap 6 and 4 and give them an extra 3rd or something and find a way to go up and get Justin Fields, maybe. But it really has the sense that they're going to stand by Jalen Hurts. And maybe they have much more optimism for Jalen Hurts than I do. I am encouraged by the growth of Jalen Hurts, and I do like the progression that he's shown as a player over the last 2 years. His throwing mechanics and his accuracy have been just phenomenal. But I was talking about Jalen Hurts in my quarterback rankings. I think he is almost an identical player to Drew Lock for the Denver Broncos, where he's got great physical traits. He's a little faster, I would say. He's probably not quite as accurate down the field, although it's pretty close. But both these players, their problem is playing in structure. And there were some moments for Jalen Hurts, especially when he came out, beat the Saints, kind of shocked the world. But when I really dove into Jalen Hurts' tape, there's a lot of issues there. There's a lot of development still to do as far as playing in structure, and beyond that, it's leaning too much on his feet, bailing from clean pockets, not knowing when to kind of hang in there, let that deep dig develop, let that post route develop, let the comeback develop, look off safeties, the things that lead to high level passing in the NFL. It just wasn't there from Jalen Hurts. It was, either that first read is open and I can kind of deliver that, or I'm just going to run and kind of improvise and play hero ball, which is a lot of what Carson Wentz was doing too, to be fair. But personally, I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to come in next year and, earn this starting job. I think the most likely scenario is they stand by Jalen Hurts, which at this point, fine. Like, I think it's worth finding out what kind of development he can show next year. That's totally fair. But I think what's likely here is, turns out he's a good quarterback. He's maybe a low-level starter. He's maybe a high-level backup, something like that. He's somewhere in that 25 to 35 range of quarterbacks, but they don't win a lot of games. And you're sitting there like the Broncos next year, or the Broncos right now with my comp for Hurts, which is Drew Lock, and you're just like, okay, what do we do here? Do we move up for a quarterback? Do we trade for a veteran like Carson Wentz? What's the plan here at quarterback? We're not going to go very far with Jalen Hurts, and I don't really see the future for the Eagles. And yeah, you're going to get the Colts first rounder next year, most likely. It's probably going to be a pick in the 20s. So, I mean, maybe they're sitting here next year and they're bad enough to go up and get one of the top quarterbacks next year. But all of a sudden, I think the Eagles are kind of stuck in purgatory. They have a lot of veterans that are not going to be particularly happy, I don't think, unless Hurts really balls out. But guys like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, who have signed extensions to stay there, Darius Slay, who forced his way out of Detroit and was happy to sign an extension here in Philadelphia. Those guys, your Lane Johnson, Kelsey on the offensive line. There's been a lot of veterans here that really want to be great next year that might not be so happy about having a middling quarterback. And maybe Howie Roseman just is genius, and this is a chess move where Jalen Hurts is just going to take off and be elite next year. I wouldn't hedge on that happening. If I was in the Eagles' shoes, I would be doing everything I could to go up and get a Justin Fields or a Zach Wilson in this draft. But that's not going to be easy to do, especially if you didn't get a first-round pick for Wentz this year. So I don't like the direction of the Eagles at this point in time. I thought they had a chance to kind of save Carson Wentz a little bit, getting him a playmaker with that 6th pick, get your offensive line back, a new offensive coordinator, get rid of Doug Peterson. But they go the route of moving on from Wentz. And it's going to be definitely fascinating to see how it plays out, but I don't think the Eagles are going to be very good next year. And I think Hurts is good enough that he might get them to constantly be kind of questioning themselves at the quarterback position. We see this all the time, right? With quarterbacks like Drew Lock, like the Washington team with Dwayne Haskins last year. We're going to see it, I think, moving forward with Tua a little bit. Like teams convince themselves that they can win with the quarterback they have, when in reality they should be looking to upgrade. And I'm really worried that the Eagles are going to get into that situation because I think Hurts can play, but he's got a lot of issues as well. So I don't know. You can tell the change of tone in my voice that I don't see this working out for the Eagles. I think Wentz is going to be really good for the Colts and really make the Eagles look stupid for this. And my kind of trust and I guess benefit of the doubt that I've given towards the Eagles organization since they won that Super Bowl, it's completely disappeared. And to the point where I'm starting to lean towards saying that the Eagles are one of the worst run organizations in all of the NFL. And I like Howie Roseman as a scout, but he's really had a rough couple years as a general manager, and this is, I think, another step back for the Eagles organization. So maybe Jalen Hurts is the guy and proves me wrong. I just have my doubts. So there's the breakdown on the trade. I think the Colts stole the show here, and the Eagles are not looking great. I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, we're going to get into my 2019 NFL Draft regrades, which is going to be super fun, and then we're going to open up the mailbag. So now it is time to regrade my 2019 NFL Draft grades. And this is a frequently requested video topic. So I'm going to mix it in here to the podcast and clip this up on its own. So if you're watching this on an independent video here on YouTube, please do hit that like button down below. But this is a really fun thought experiment to do here, just to kind of go back, see what I thought about these players, how things have turned out, so that's fun. But it's also great because when I do these videos initially, I get so many comments like, why do you do these draft grades? You don't know how these players are going to pan out. You don't know any better than these NFL teams. Like, why should I listen to your opinion? And, if you don't want to listen to my opinion, why are you watching the video anyway? But this is really fun to take the time and kind of look back on what my draft grades were and see that, okay, actually I did know what I was talking about. Turns out the preparation I did put in to the draft for months and months and months and studying these teams and their schemes does pay out. And I actually can project with a decent hit rate, kind of how these guys are going to pan out. But it is fun to also see where I was wrong and maybe what did I do wrong evaluating that player to kind of learn from that experience. So it's just a fun video to do. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get into it. Starting with the Indianapolis Colts. So I gave this an A- at the time, and this grade would have to come down. I think I would probably give this like a B now. So that all starts with Rock Ya-Sin, and this was kind of a learning experience in its own because I gave the Colts the total benefit of the doubt with this pick because I did not really like Rock Ya-Sin. I had a third-round grade on him. I kind of went against the grain for the whole draft process with people that had him as like the top. A lot of people had him as the top corner in this class. I just couldn't get behind it. I didn't see the upside with him with his athletic traits. I like the scheme fit here, and I still do. But I wish I would have stuck to my guns a little bit more here and not given them so much of the benefit of the doubt to give that an A because I didn't like Rock Ya-Sin, and it turns out that he probably should not have gone that high. As good as as good as Chris Ballard is at drafting, that's a pick that he might want back. So that would definitely drag this thing down. With Bonnigu and Paris Campbell, I did like those picks. They just haven't been able to stay healthy, so that's unfortunate. And then you did find some really good quality players in the mid-rounds. This is definitely just building on Chris Ballard's mid-round resume. You get Okereke in the end of the third. Kari Willis is a really quality box safety. He's a better player than Jonathan Abram, who was a first-round pick in this class. Marvell Tell, good call by me to say he could switch to corner. Now, he was, I think, an opt-out this year or he got injured. He might have been injured. But I just think his best football is still ahead of him. So it's not that this was a bad class. I just think their first pick, Rock Ya-Sin, which was effectively their first-round pick, was not the best use of resources. And I don't know if he's even really a starter moving forward. So I would lower this A- to a B for the Indianapolis Colts. Then our next draft here, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I gave it a B- at the time, and I think I would bump this up to a B. So they take Josh Allen, and at the time I wondered like what his path to playing time was because you had Campbell and Ngakoue there on roster. Turns out those guys weren't a part of the long-term plan there, so you would switch that to an A. I mean, Josh Allen dealt with some injuries in 2020, but he's got a bright future, so that was a great pick. And then Jawan Taylor, not so much. And I was lower on Jawan Taylor, but I did think it was good value in the second round. And he's been a decent starting tackle. Like, he's better than most second-round tackles still. So, B, A for that. And the Josh Oliver, this is a great example of me sticking to my guns and saying, yeah, that was a terrible pick. Like, they're going to regret that in 2 years. I didn't think Josh Oliver could play. I thought he was stiff, slow, that his high 40 time was a fluke. And it didn't match his play speed. And I went as far as saying this was a wasted pick and pound for pound the worst pick in this draft. So I stuck to my guns there, and he has been a total flop. That's a high third-round pick there that they spent on him. And they took him over guys like Foster Moreau and Dawson Knox, who I thought were much better players. So I shredded them for that pick, and I'm glad I did because that was a terrible pick at the time and still is. Quincy Williams was a bit of a reach. I thought the third round, gave them a C for that. And then Gardner Minshew in the sixth round, I was a little surprised that I gave them a B for this. I don't remember liking Minshew that much. I guess I thought that he kind of fit the offense a little bit here, which he obviously did. But that would end up being an A retroactively because, I mean, you get a potential starting caliber quarterback in the sixth round. Like, that's immense value. He might be turning into a third or fourth round pick this year after giving you a couple years of good starting quarterback play. So, I think I would bump this up actually probably to a B because the Josh Allen pick makes a lot more sense in hindsight. You get Gardner Minshew there. Jawan Taylor, not the worst pick in the world. I know he hasn't been quite the high upside pick that a lot of people thought he would be, but there's definitely some bad in there as well in the third round especially, but overall a decent pick. I would maybe actually raise this to like a B. And then the Houston Texans, kind of spot on here, right? Titus Howard gave it a C. Lonnie Johnson gave it a C. Didn't think those guys were going to be good football players. They've been just low-level starters, I suppose. Sharping's been fine as a guard in the second round. Waring hasn't really developed. Amenahue was a pick I liked here, and he's been maybe the best player out of this class for the Texans. So I would totally just stick with a C here. And let's just move on. I think I nailed that grade there for the Texans. Tennessee Titans, I think I nailed this one as well. So I gave Jeffrey Simmons an A. I love the upside there. And then A.J. Brown, I gave an A. I love the upside there. And, I mean, those guys are they're future superstars. Like, you could argue this should be an A-plus draft just because they got Simmons and A.J. Brown. So screw it. Let's make this an A-plus for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, you walk away with two superstars at nice positions, receiver and defensive line. That's a great start. But then you get a starting right guard and Nate Davis. I did give that a B at the time. Amani Hooker and David Long have been decent role players for them. And DeAndre Walker hasn't quite been the role player that I thought he would be. He actually isn't on the team anymore. But, I mean, you got a really nice hit rate of all these picks. And I gave it an A at the time, and I think that was good analysis at the time. So then we are on to the AFC East. And this is probably one of my worst grades here, the Buffalo Bills. Ed Oliver, it's not looking great. He just hasn't developed with this team the way I thought he would, and that's definitely concerning. I mean, you would probably lower that to like a C+ or a B- if I was doing pluses and minuses. I still hope he can work out, but the development just hasn't been there. I'm starting to get worried about Ed Oliver. Cody Ford, again, I wasn't quite as high on him as other people, but I still thought it was a good value, good pick, and a big need for them. Neither of those top two picks have really worked out. They saved it a little bit, getting Singletary, which I gave a B to, Dawson Knox, which I gave an A to. Third round, those are some decent picks. You get some starting caliber players, but overall, this was not a good draft. I think you'd change this to probably a C for the Buffalo Bills. So probably a missed grade there for me on the Bills. Then the Miami Dolphins. This is an interesting one. So I was definitely right about Christian Wilkins being a reach at 13. And I actually was very critical of them for not taking Jeffrey Simmons because I thought the Dolphins were a great team to take Simmons because they weren't ready to win this year. And it's, Simmons, if anything, was going to help them be worse in year one and then get that higher upside later. And now here in 2020, if the Dolphins offered Christian Wilkins to the Titans for Jeffrey Simmons, they would laugh their asses off. So I was definitely right about Wilkins being a good player, but having very limited upside. Between Wilkins and Furl in this class, both these Clemson guys went way higher than they should have based on their upside, in my opinion, and that's played out. And then I gave the trade for Josh Rosen an A, and I actually wouldn't change that because the process was so sound there. They traded down to get a future second-round pick from the Saints, and then they used that back end of the second-round pick to get Josh Rosen, basically a third-round pick, to get Josh Rosen for free because they picked up a second-round pick in the next year's class. And I would do that process all over again. I know it didn't work out, but I thought that was a really smooth move from the Dolphins. And that's a big reason I gave them an A- because I thought that was a really nice, high-upside, no-risk move. Like, they literally got him for free. And I would do that all over again. So I would keep that there. Where I was really wrong here, though, was Dieter and Prince. I thought these were going to be starting caliber linemen. Maybe there was some Big Ten bias there. Maybe the Dolphins O-line coach just stinks or stank. I don't even know if the same guy is there. But definitely those would come down to like C's. Like, those guys did not work out the way I thought they would be. I was wrong, especially on Michael Dieter, who I was really high on. So definitely whiffed there. And then Andrew Van Ginkel, I did like that pick from a scheme fit. And Myles Gaskin, I thought, was a quality potential low-end starter. So I was right about a couple of those guys. But overall, I would bring this down, probably down to like a C, because you really didn't do much with this draft. You got a D tackle, like whatever, and Andrew Van Ginkel, and a decent running back. So I would move this down to a C. The Dolphins really didn't walk out much with this class. And then we got the New York Jets. So you get Quinnen Williams there. I like that pick. At the time, I'm glad I gave it an A and didn't fully bury myself in the Ed Oliver over Quinnen Williams train. I had both those guys as blue chip prospects. So I may have actually drafted Ed Oliver if I was the Jets. So thank God for the Jets fans that wasn't me, because that would have been a bad pick. But the rest of this, I think I was pretty spot on. Ja'Kai Polite, I would make that risk all over again. I know it didn't work out, but his tape was really incredible at Florida. Now, it turns out he just didn't want to work at the next level, and he has not worked out anywhere. But taking a swing for a high upside guy. Now, if you're in the NFL shoes, you would think you could interview these guys and have a better feel of how they're going to work at the next level. But I don't think I would really change that. Third round, taking a chance on a high upside edge rusher, I'm fine with it. But these next two picks I was extremely critical on. So I was definitely right to be hard on them for drafting Chuma Edoga and Trayvon Wesco. Just low upside picks. I didn't understand those at the time, and those were really bad picks. Those guys are not impacts on their team. Blake Cashman, this was a huge learning experience for me. I loved his game. Fast, instinctive, secure tackler, did everything from the linebacker position. But the medicals had some massive red flags on him. And that's something that in my position, from a, from home independent draft analyst, I had no way of knowing that his medicals were so severe. He's been decent when he's been on the field, but that's been the issue, is staying on the field. It's why he fell, and it's made me look bad for liking him as much as I did. So it's definitely a learning experience. I wish things played out differently, but it is what it is. And then Bleswan Austin, I did have him as a sleeper in this class, and Jets sniped him. He's a starting caliber cornerback, so that's nice. I would probably lower this grade a little bit to a C-, but you still walk out of here with Quinnen Williams and Bleswan Austin, and I like the risks they took with Cashman and Polite. Unfortunately, they just didn't work out in their favor. So I would lower that to a B- for the Jets. Then the New England Patriots, this was another example, like the Colts, of me giving a team too much of the benefit of the doubt. They were just coming off of another Super Bowl win. So I gave them a Bill Belichick face for their grade. I talked about how giving a draft grade to the Patriots might be the one team that it's stupid to do because they're so good at finding specific skill sets for their team. And I did mention that I'd probably give this a B+ if I was giving a grade, so we'll pretend that this is actually a B+. But yeah, I should have stuck to my guns on N'Keal Harry a lot more. I thought that with Tom Brady's good ball placement and N'Keal Harry's physicality that this would work out, but I did have a third-round grade on N'Keal Harry. I thought he didn't belong anywhere near the first round, and the Patriots actually ended up having a pretty bad draft here. So definitely a learning experience to factor in the benefit of the doubt and the scheme fit and say if I think a guy is going to work out. But if I really don't like a guy like N'Keal Harry, then stick to my guns. Don't be afraid to say that Bill Belichick and Tom Brady can be wrong. So N'Keal Harry, that's a D pick. It's an F pick. He's been a bust. I didn't think he could separate, and he can't. So turns out I was right about that. I just wish that I stuck to my guns a little more. Juwan Williams, I still think can play here. They just have such a deep secondary, so I'd stand by a B there. Some good mid-round picks here to kind of save the day. Chase Winovich was great value in the third round. Damian Harris is a stud right now. Byron Coward, I still think could develop. But given a little bit too much of the benefit of the doubt here on guys like Yadni Kajust, maybe Jarrett Stidham was a decent pick, but probably not an A pick. I don't know. It was still a good risk to take a chance on a high upside quarterback like that. But like Ken Webster, gave it a B. Just a little bit too much of the benefit of the doubt here. I think they got some decent picks in there. It's not like they failed this draft, but I'd probably lower it to a B- here for the Patriots because the N'Keal Harry pick was just not very good. And that lack of separation ability for those receivers is holding them back today. So then the Denver Broncos. So I gave this one an A. And looking at this, I think I would stand by that. Maybe a little bit lower, like an A-, but for the most part, this was good analysis. Noah Fant trading down, getting an extra second-round pick to essentially get Drew Lock for free was a great, crafty move for them. So you love that. And Noah Fant has really come on late. He looks like a rising star at tight end, especially if Drew Lock could get his act together here. But I love the fact that you basically got Drew Lock for free. Whether he works out or not, that's the kind of risk you want to take in the second round. So I would do that all over again. Dalton Reisner has been definitely good for a second round pick. He's been almost exactly what I thought he would be. Just starting caliber rock at left guard. Nothing more, nothing less. But that in the second round is a great pick. And then Draymond Jones, this was a great call by me. I loved Draymond Jones. I thought he would take a little bit of time and then really come on. And that's exactly what's happened. He had an excellent second half of the season for the Broncos. So he's been awesome. And then Justin Hollins has actually been a good player for the Rams. So it doesn't work out for the Broncos, but that was still a good pick. I would stick by this for the Broncos. I mean, even if Drew Lock doesn't work out, those first four picks was really great execution in this draft. So I would stick with an A there for the Broncos. Then the LA Chargers, this one absolutely has to come down. Absolutely has to come down. So they didn't really get anything out of this class, to be completely honest. This would have to come down to like a D. I mean, they blew this draft. Jerry Tillery in the first round is a bust. I wasn't crazy on him. I'm very proud of my analysis on Jerry Tillery. Some people had him as like a top 20 player. I was not on board with that, which is evident by the fact that I even didn't give them an A for this. A lot of people probably were drooling over this pick. I thought he was a second round player, so to take him in the end of the first was fine. But he just hasn't worked out. And then you have Nasir Adderley. I thought was a great pick. A lot of people loved him. Again, a lot of people had first round grades on him. I didn't, but he fit a need in the second round. I thought next to Derwin James, he would crush it. And he really hasn't even shown a ton of flashes. And then the rest of these guys, Trey Pipkins, Tranquil, Stick, Agbule, Broughton, they've turned in nothing. So, I mean, this was a terrible draft for the Chargers looking back on this. This would have to come down to a D. So I thought some of those mid-round picks Tranquil's been the best player in this whole class, which is just crazy. But I thought that Adderley would work out, and some of those mid-round picks would work out, and Tillery maybe could come into his own here, but just hasn't happened. So that one definitely off. One of the worst grades here. Kansas City Chiefs, I gave this one an A. So at the time I was factoring in like traded picks. I don't think I do that anymore, so that just kind of makes things weird. But looking at this with what they had, no first-round pick here, I gave them an A 100%. So you get Hardman and Thornhill in the second round. I mean, those are key pieces of their team now. Colin Saunders is a great defensive tackle for a third-round pick, and he's only getting better. Great's a big word, but that's a good third-round pick. And then just flip the A and the C here with Darwin Thompson and Rashad Fenton, because Rashad Fenton's been a quality slot corner for them. And then Nick Allegretti started in the playoffs. Wasn't great, but for a seventh-round pick. I would stick by an A here, considering what they had, what they did with what they had was really impressive. I mean, Hardman, Thornhill, Sanders, Fenton, you're walking out of here with some impact. Even Nick Allegretti has some value. Then you have the Oakland Raiders, now Las Vegas Raiders. I was really hard on them for this draft, but I will give myself some credit here. As much as I hated their first round, I thought they made up for it later in the draft, which saved their draft at a C+. And Raiders fans were coming at me because they thought I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, I don't think there is a grade in this video that's going to be more accurate than what I say about the Raiders. So Clelin Ferrell at 1.4, I actually gave it a C because I thought he could play. I just didn't like the upside at that spot. That's played out. You could maybe even lower that to a D. Josh Jacobs, I gave a D because I didn't think they were in a position to draft a running back. As great as Josh Jacobs has been, there's so many better things they could have done than taking a running back at that pick. Maybe flip Ferrell and Jacobs, C and D. I did like Josh Jacobs, but I could not get behind that pick from a value perspective. Jonathan Abram, I gave a C. Probably lower that to a D. But I said he was a box safety, that it was not a position of value. And Trayvon Mullen, I thought was the highest upside best player that they took potentially in those first 36 picks. But even then, I didn't think he was awesome. So I really did not like the start of their draft, and these guys have not made big impacts other than, Josh Jacobs, but he's a running back. And I didn't think this team was in position to draft a running back that early. But again, I said they saved their draft late. Max Crosby, I thought was great value in the fourth round. He's worked out for a fourth round pick. Isaiah Johnson's, showed some flashes for a fourth round corner. Foster Moreau is awesome, and Hunter Renfrow, I didn't think he ever should have fallen to the fifth round because he was just a baller in the slot. So they saved it late by getting some better players. But yeah, man, a C+. They got a bunch of starters in this class. They accomplished that, but with the amount of picks that they had, this was an underwhelming draft. It was then, and it still is. Then to the AFC North, the Cincinnati Bengals. So I gave this an A, and that's probably going to come down. Jonah Williams I still think will work out. I loved that pick. It was one of my favorite picks in the first round. I still think that will work out. So I would stand by that. But the rest of this just hasn't really worked out. Drew Sample, I did give a D, which I did not think was a great pick, and he's slowly come on, but I would probably stand by that was a reach at the time. But some of these mid-round picks, Jermaine Pratt's been pretty hit or miss. Ryan Finley, I seem to give a lot of high grades for these mid-round quarterbacks just for taking a chance. Wren, I liked him. He has turned into nothing. Deshaun Davis, Jordan Brown, Travion Williams. These guys have not worked out. And Michael Jordan, I thought, was a really nice value at the end of the fourth round. And it kind of was, but he stinks. He is one of the worst guards in the NFL, so that hurts this for sure. I still like that you got Jonah Williams, and you're happy that you have him. And Rodney Anderson, another one of those injury cases. But I would change this probably to a B. Just kind of a underwhelming draft after you kind of lucked into Jonah Williams there. Then the Cleveland Browns, again, they got the trade value there for Odell Beckham. So I did give this an A. I love the Greedy Williams pick. Did not like the Sion Taki pick. He's actually been okay for a mid-third round pick. Redwine, I like that. Mac Wilson, I like that. The rest of those guys haven't really turned into anything, so pretty spot on pick by pick here, I would say, other than Sion Taki. Greedy, I gave an A+. He's had a hard time staying healthy, so we'll see what he turns into. But yeah, kind of hard to say if this grade was good or bad because of the Odell Beckham trade. Probably lower that grade a little bit, but kind of a weird draft. I would say probably bring that down to a B. Baltimore Ravens. Gave this one a B-, and I think that's held up pretty well. I did like the Marquise Brown pick, but I had my hesitations on him, and I did say that with Lamar Jackson, I don't know how well he's going to be able to unlock Marquise Brown as a receiver, and that has held up, despite the fact that Lamar has gone on and done some amazing other things. As far as unlocking perimeter receivers, that has not really been one of his accomplishments. Jalen Ferguson, I still think his best days are ahead, so I like that. And then the rest of these guys, Miles Boykin's been fine for basically a fourth-round pick. Justice Hill has not really worked out. Ben Powers was a decent fourth-round pick. You got Iman Marshall. He, I think, was an opt-out. Dalen Mack didn't make the team. Trace McSorley. I think B- holds up pretty well for the Ravens. I think this was just a decent, steady draft for the Ravens, who didn't have a ton of draft capital there. Pittsburgh Steelers, I gave it a B+, and in hindsight, that looks pretty good here. You get Devin Bush. He's actually been a little better than I thought, but they did give up a lot to move up and get him. But that probably would end up being an A for Devin Bush. He's been awesome. Deontay Johnson in the third round was a great pick then. I loved it then. Justin Lane, I still think could develop. He was extremely raw, so I'm not gonna write him off quite yet. So pretty good picks there for the first 3 rounds. And then after that, nothing's really worked out there, so I think B+ actually held up really well for the Steelers. Then next up, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers moving into the NFC, and I gave this a B+ at the time. I like this draft, but it's been even better than that. Devin White, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jamel Dean. I actually don't know why I didn't give Sean Murphy-Bunting a grade. I really liked Sean Murphy-Bunting. I had an early second-round grade on him, so I'm surprised I didn't give that an A, but you got Devin White, great pick. Probably got to change that to an A. He's been awesome. He's kind of changed the mentality of that defense a little bit. And then Jamel Dean also would be an A. I think those first 3 picks you change to an A. Mike Edwards goes up to a B or an A. I mean, he's been a good safety for basically a 4th-round pick. Anthony Nelson's been a great run defender. Scotty Miller in the 6th round. I mean, this definitely has been an even better draft than I thought. I thought it was a good draft, but it turned out that was a great draft and was a big reason they won the Super Bowl this draft. So I would move that up to an A+, considering these guys were critical pieces of their Super Bowl run. White, Bunting, Dean, Edwards, all those guys played awesome in the playoffs. Then the Atlanta Falcons, I gave this a B-. Looking at this, that looks pretty spot on. I mean, you got 2 starting offensive tackles. That was pretty much their entire draft. Lindstrom's been really good. You would change that to an A, but McGarry's been okay, so maybe a B there. Sheffield hasn't really worked out. Kaminsky, Allison, Miller. I think B- was a good evaluation. They got their offensive lineman that they were asking for. McGarry was a bit of a reach and kind of always was. So, I didn't think they really nailed the second half of their draft, and they didn't. So B- holds up there. Carolina Panthers, I gave them an A here, and I would say that needs to come down. The Brian Burns pick, I'm glad I gave that an A because he is a total steal at 16. And at the end of the day, you look back and say, well, at least we got Brian Burns. Worst case, you're going to give this thing a B. But that's pretty much worst case because the rest of these guys, most of them aren't even on the team. And well, that's not true. Greg Little, Greer, Miller, Daly, they're all still on the team. But I was just a lot higher on a lot of these picks. Greg Little has not really worked out at all. Will Greer, we haven't really seen much of him, so it's hard to say that he's bad, but he just hasn't been anything there. And then Christian Miller hasn't worked out. Jordan Scarlett no longer on the team. So I gave a lot of those picks A's. I thought they got great value. I liked a lot of those guys. And some of those mid-round picks I was pretty off on, I would say. So I would change this just to a B. You got Brian Burns and nothing else. The Saints I gave a C+ here. So they didn't have a first-round pick because of the Davenport trade. But looking back on this, they did a good job to get value. Getting Eric McCoy and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which I loved that pick. I can't believe that was a 4th-round pick, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So I at least loved that pick. And then the Eric McCoy thing would be an A. So you did get 2 really good starters out of this. I think you would bump that up to a B. But the rest of these guys, Elise Mack, Caden Ellis, the Davenport trade, I still think holds up as kind of a bad trade. You basically traded Marcus Davenport for Jair Alexander and Darnell Savage to the Packers for 2 first-round picks. But, I would move this up to a B. You get McCoy and Gardner-Johnson without a first-round pick. It's pretty damn good. Potentially 2 first-round players there. Then the Dallas Cowboys, I gave them an A at the time, and I think that's got to come down. Now, part of that is because they got Amari Cooper, and they're riding the highs of his success there for Dallas. Again, weird grading with the trade, but Tristan Hill not really working out. Joe Jackson, I like that. Mike Weber, Jalen Jelks. None of those guys have worked out. I like those picks. McGovern's been all right as a rotational piece. Tony Pollard, I like that pick a little bit. But that one probably turns into an A. The Michael Jackson pick hasn't really worked out. So this draft, and Tristan Hill, definitely not an A. He hasn't really worked out. So this draft was pretty much a flop. You get Tony Pollard and a rotational swingman at offensive line with McGovern and Pollard, so that's fine, but I would lower this to a C-. But that's also the Amari Cooper thing. Makes it weird. That was a great trade for Amari Cooper, so that would bump it up to like a B. So let's just go B-, I suppose, with Dallas. I don't know. It's weird with the trades. I don't do that anymore. Then the Philadelphia Eagles. Was I wrong on Andre Dillard? Maybe. He's been injured. I like Andre Dillard. I've always liked Andre Dillard. He hasn't necessarily been bad when he's played. It's just injuries. And that always sucks with this kind of thing because you can't predict injuries. And I think I explained this well why I liked it for this draft in this video. So it is what it is. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. Then Miles Sanders. That was a great pick in the 2nd round. Great analysis by me and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Gave that a D. Said, why the hell are you taking him over DK Metcalf? Bingo. Sharif Miller, Clayton Thorson, kind of whatever. So I gave it a B. You got to lower that, I think. In hindsight, you really are just walking out of this with Miles Sanders. I still think Dillard could work out if he can stay healthy. So I would lower this to a C- with how bad the Arcega-Whiteside pick looks in hindsight. Then the New York Giants, another team with the Raiders. The Raiders and the Giants, I really was hard on them for their drafts, and it turns out that I was right to be hard on them. So they take Daniel Jones. I gave it an F, and I guess that's maybe a D now because he's a little better than I expected, and I've admitted that. Like he's much more Ryan Tannehill than Blake Bortles, which I was really hard on them for that pick. But you're still never taking Daniel Jones with the 6th overall pick if you're redoing this. You're just not. So that proved to be correct. And then Dexter Lawrence, I was like, why are you taking a nose tackle this early? He's fine, but that's way too early for a nose tackle, and he's been a good player, but probably not making that pick again. DeAndre Baker, I thought was fine, but you traded up to get him, and I didn't even think he was the best corner available. And, I mean, obviously he had crazy off-the-field issues, but when he was on the field, he wasn't all that good. I thought that Byron Murphy or Greedy Williams would have been much better players. Turns out I was right there. O'Shane Ximines, Julian Love, I thought were the best players they got here, along with Darius Slayton. I didn't realize I gave Darius Slayton a B. I'm glad I did because he worked out. You definitely saved this with some of those mid-round picks with Ximines, Julian Love, and Darius Slayton, which is exactly what I said at the time. Was those were kind of the picks to look at, and Corey Valentine I liked. But I gave it a D-. I guess you'd give it a C- now. Like Jones and Lawrence have been a little bit better than expected, but I didn't like this draft at the time, and looking back on it, I still don't like this draft. Then the Washington football team, formerly the R word, I gave it an A- because I loved the Dwayne Haskins pick. I thought he was a steal. I thought he was better than Daniel Jones, and turns out he was nowhere close to as good as Daniel Jones, so that was definitely wrong. I was wrong on Dwayne Haskins. I didn't know that he would get to the NFL and just stop trying, basically. So that sucks that happened, because I thought he was a much better player than Daniel Jones with more upside. That's obviously going to have to lower the grade here, but you did nail it after that. You get Montez Sweat, who was a really good pick. He's been probably a little better than I expected. I was lower on Montez Sweat. He hasn't been this elite edge rush threat that some people thought he might be, and he might still get there. But that's probably more like a B+, A- pick. And then Terry McLaurin in the third round was one of the best picks of the class. That saves the kind of Dwayne Haskins pick. And then you get Cole Holcomb in the fifth round, was under the radar, like awesome pick. Jimmy Moreland, awesome pick. So they did do some nice things. If you just ignore the Haskins pick there and look at the rest of their draft, it's still a really good draft and actually would probably still be an A-. But you bust on the quarterback and waste your time with that, probably lowers it to a B+. But the rest of the draft, you still got some really good players. So I end up being right on the grade, but for the wrong reasons. Arizona Cardinals here end up getting an A+ because you get Kyler Murray, and then they got a bunch of players that I thought were excellent values. So, you get Kyler Murray. He was great, as I thought he would be. Great move to move on from Rosen. So that was a great take from the beginning. Byron Murphy's been a really good player. Probably not quite as good as I thought he would be, but his best football may still be ahead of him. Andy Isabella, I think they still make that pick again. Speed in the end of the second round. It hasn't worked out there, but it's obviously not an A now, but that's fine. Zach Allen was a learning experience. He didn't have the get off the athletic traits. I loved his finesse, but definitely a learning experience there to say, like, okay, if a guy doesn't have the traits, he's probably not going to return first, second value. Now, he's been about an average for a third round pick, but he's not been the guy I thought he would be. And then Hakeem Butler in the fourth round. So this is about where I had Butler, was a fourth round pick as a kind of swing for the fences at receiver. So I was right to be lower on Hakeem Butler, and then he fell in the draft, and everyone thought this was a great pick. I did say, I don't really like Hakeem Butler, but he's worth this pick right here. Then they took Deontay Thompson. He's been a good pick in the fifth round. And then I was wrong on Caleb Wilson. So, maybe a little bit overreactive to Isabella, Allen, Butler, Caleb Wilson. You probably lower it to just an A instead of an A+ and give him that extra mile. But you walk out of this with Kyler Murray, Byron Murphy, and Deontay Thompson, who's a starting caliber safety, and you're pretty damn happy with that class. Then the Niners, I gave this a C+ because I was critical of some of those mid-round picks. But in hindsight, you got to boost that up because Nick Bosa has been an A++++. He was one of the best rookies I've ever seen. And then Debo ended up being much better than I expected as well. He was an A pick. Now, he's had a hard time staying healthy, which you factor in there. But I did not like the Hurd pick, which I was correct about. I did not like taking a punter in the fourth round. I was correct about that. So some proper criticisms there, but I did not see Dre Greenlaw being as good as he is. So that definitely was a miss by me. He's been a total stud. So I would bump this up to, I think, an A. You walk out of this with Bosa, Samuel, and Dre Greenlaw, who are three quality starters at worst. You're real happy with that pick, with that draft. And they ended up going to the Super Bowl the next year. Then the LA Rams, I gave this an A because of the amount of value they got. And looking back on this, pretty spot on. You got Rapp at the end of the second was decent value. Henderson, starting caliber players there. David Long was a great pick in the third. Bobby Evans, he hasn't been quite as good as David Edwards, but Greg Gaines was a great pick in the fourth round. So I thought they did a good job considering they didn't have a first round pick. Their first pick was at the end of the second round. And you walked out of this with some good playmakers. So relative to the assets that they had, this was a really good draft. If these are the picks that you have, usually you're not walking out of, 4 picks from, what is that, pick 60? So you have 5 picks from pick 60 through the 5th round. You're usually not going to walk out of that hitting on 4 out of those 5 picks. So, and then you get hit on David Edwards in the 6th round. So relative to where they were picking, they did a really good job in this draft. So I'm fine with the A grade. The impact isn't A impact, but I thought it was really good execution. And other than like Bobby Evans, they kind of hit on all those picks. So I thought that was pretty good analysis. Seattle Seahawks, another team where I gave them a lot of benefit of the doubt, but I did like a lot of these picks inside this draft, and I think this was actually pretty accurate analysis now that I look at this a little further. So LJ Collier, maybe gave them a little bit too much benefit of the doubt. I had a 3rd to a 5th round grade on him. That was a huge reach and still is. So I should have been a little more critical of that instead of giving them so much benefit of the doubt, saying, oh, Pete Carroll, they'll figure this out. Marquise Blair, I thought that pick was just fine. I think I had a 3rd round grade on him. I just thought that there was other safeties available that they could have gone with, and that's played out. Guys like Taylor Rapp and Deontay Thompson and Julian Love, you probably would take those guys over Marquise Blair at this point. Obviously, DK Metcalf, glad I gave that an A. He was my number 1 receiver in the class, so that saves this whole thing. That got me excited. You got Cody Barton developing. Gary Jennings, I still think was a good scheme fit, just didn't work out there. Ugo Amadi, a slot guy, I really liked him, so that's worked out. Ben Burke-Kirven has had a hard time getting on the field because KJ Wright refuses to go away, but I still think he can play. You get Travis Homer there. So I gave them a B+. I think that's pretty spot on. You reached on some guys, especially LJ Collier, but you make up on it. You know, if you just flip Metcalf and LJ Collier, this thing looks a lot better. So I think B+ is totally fair for this draft. And then the Bears, again, with the Khalil Mack trade, tough to kind of reflect on this thing. But you walk out of here with David Montgomery. I was super high on Riley Ridley. I'm not ready to give up on this, guys. I had a late 1st, early 2nd round grade on Riley Ridley, and until I see him step on the NFL field and be bad at football, I'm not going to admit that I was wrong, because he's been buried behind, honestly, a really talented group of receivers there for Chicago, and he's the kind of receiver, he's a timing receiver, and he's been playing with Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles. I'm not going to give up on Riley Ridley until I see him get full-time playing time with a real quarterback and really suck. So, like, I'm going to stand by that A grade. I still think he can play. When he's been on the field, he's graded well and produced. So, I get it. It doesn't look great that I was so high on Riley Ridley, but I'm blaming the Bears for that one. I think Riley Ridley can still play. And then you got Duke Shelley, was actually a pretty good pick in the 6th round. White in Denmark. So, you know, based on what they had to work with here, they did pretty good. You get Montgomery. I still like Riley Ridley. Duke Shelley, kind of like that Rams draft. I think B+ works just fine here for the Bears. Not a B+ impact, but with the Mac trade, it makes things weird. Then the Detroit Lions, I was hard on them for this draft. You know, the Hawkinson pick, it's funny, people are comparing Kyle Pitts to TJ Hawkinson and saying this is why you don't take a tight end early. Completely different players. I did say, you know, I'm all in on taking Kyle Pitts in the top 10. I did say with Hawkinson that top 10 is a little bit early for a tight end because Hawkinson's a real tight end. He's not a receiver like Kyle Pitts is. But, yeah, I gave them a B. I thought it was fine, and that's been a fine pick. Jelani Tavai, that was accurate. I mean, he's been a good run defender, but I thought that was totally Matt Patricia, like, overstepping himself, and that's exactly what happened. He's just a big, slow thumper that had no business being a top 50 pick. So I was definitely spot on about that being a bad pick. Will Harris has been fine, like, whatever. Austin Bryant was probably a little too high there, but Amani Oruwariye was a great pick in the 5th round. I love that one. Travis Fulgham, it's funny, I listened to what I said about him. I said I liked his tape, but that I wished I could have seen more because from Old Dominion I couldn't find a full game cut up, so my eval was almost like incomplete on him. But that was a good pick. He didn't work out here for Detroit, unfortunately. You got Ty Johnson, Isaac Nata. Nata's had a hard time getting on the field, but I still think he can play a role. I think he's actually on the Packers now. But yeah, I think I gave him a C+ at the time. I think that holds up pretty damn well. You get Hawkinson with that 8th pick. Harris and Tavai just didn't really work out. I think Bryant can still be that role player, and Amani Oruwariye was great value in the 5th round. So C+ I think is pretty good grade for the Lions here. I would hold up to that. And then we got the Green Bay Packers. So they took Rashawn Gary. I loved Rashawn Gary, but I was disappointed that the Packers took him because it was going to be hard for him to see the field. Well, long term, it's looking like it's going to play out and work out for them. It's why I gave him a B, because as much as I didn't think he was a good scheme fit and wasn't a need, I believed in the player, and that's worked out. It's just taken a while for it to work out, and I thought that they should have gone with DK Metcalf or Hollywood Brown there. And maybe hindsight, you would still do that differently, but I like the Savage pick. He's been great. He's still getting better. He's still very young and explosive, and had a really nice 2020. Elton Jenkins, loved that pick, and that turned out well. A there. Jay Sternberger has not quite worked out. I'm not ready to quite give up on Sternberger. He's a hard time staying healthy. This is kind of a make or break year for him. And then the rest of those picks were kind of so-so. So I gave them a B+. I think you could probably up that to an A-, honestly, with how good Elton Jenkins has been, Savage. But, I didn't like that they didn't walk out of this with a receiver, and that's held up. So I'm actually going to stand by the B+ here for the Packers. I think that was pretty good analysis of that draft. Then we got the Minnesota Vikings, last one here. I gave them an A. I like the Bradbury pick. I like the Irv Smith pick. Those have worked out. Some of those mid-round picks I thought were pretty good value, but they haven't really worked out. Samia, Smith, Watts, Epps isn't even on the team anymore. Udo, Chris Boyd, Dylan Mitchell. I thought those were all pretty solid picks, and none of them really worked out. Alexander Madison has worked out. End of the third round, that's like a fourth-round pick. You probably change that one to like an A. I mean, he's a really good backup running back for a fourth-round pick, basically. So you change that, and then I was right in saying BC Johnson was better than Dylan Mitchell. That's probably an A pick for almost Mr. Irrelevant there. So it was not a bad draft, coming away with Bradbury, Smith, Madison, and BC. All the other picks were just kind of whiffs, though, so I would probably lower this to like a B+. But overall, I like this draft, and it has not set their organization back. It just wasn't a crazy draft. But a lot of those picks were, pick 200 and beyond, so you're not expecting them to hit on a lot of those guys anyway. So I would change that to a B+ for the Vikings. So there is my draft regrade reactions, I suppose. I would say I think this is fair. I'd say about 2/3 of these drafts I was pretty spot on, and then a third of them were pretty off. Not pretty off. I would say there's maybe 3 or 4 of these that were definitely just wrong straight up, and then some of them, maybe a third of them were just things didn't work out. You have excuses for injuries and other things that you could probably point to. But yeah, all in all, I'm really proud of these draft grades. I'm excited to do this again next year. It's just a fun thing to look back on, and I look at it as kind of a confidence booster for myself as we head into the draft, to say like, all right, we're doing pretty good with these things, and able to project these future success of these players pretty dang well. So I hope you guys enjoyed that segment. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit that like button. If you're tuning in for the full podcast version here, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and do the mailbag. So BRB. So on to our final segment here, the mailbag. And a reminder that if you want to submit questions for the show, you can do it through my Patreon. It is patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. And once you're there, submit these questions, guys, through the DMs there on Patreon. And make sure you lead with mailbag question before you ask your question, just so I know kind of in the intro, teaser for the inbox that is a mailbag question and not something else you want to ask me. And a lot of you guys have been posting on my creator page. I have a really hard time seeing it when you post on my creator page, so make sure you are sending them through the DMs and leading with mailbag question. Okay, first question here from Kerr. With both former Seahawks coordinators being headed to Jacksonville, Bevel and Schottenheimer, will they hold Trevor Lawrence back in the very conservative, predictive offense like what happened with Russell Wilson? I would not be worried about that at all. That to me was all Pete Carroll, his influence on his traditional run the ball, take deep shots, pro-style offense. You look at what Schottenheimer wanted to do with Russell Wilson, what he did do with Russell Wilson early in the year before Pete kind of took over and changed a lot, and what Darrell Bevell did with Matthew Stafford, who's going to have a lot of those same traits that Trevor Lawrence has. I'm not worried about it at all. I actually like that combination of play designers in Jacksonville. I think those were some good options there for Urban Meyer to put together. Keegan Jones, with the new coaching staff, what kind of season do I see Kenneth Murray having? On paper, he seems like a similar player to Devin White. I agree. As a player, he is similar. He is very fast, just like Devin White. He's not quite as fast as Devin White, but very close. And he's also similar in that he doesn't have supreme, I don't want to say range, but he doesn't get a ton of depth in his drops. Although there was one play against Tyreek Hill where he got incredible depth, so maybe he's working on that. At least coming out of Oklahoma, his coverage just wasn't next level. Just like Devin White's, I would say. Devin White is awesome kind of patrolling near the line of scrimmage, sniffing stuff out, just using his instincts, sideline to sideline speed. Not so much getting a bunch of depth and all that. I will say, Kenneth Murray had a typical up-and-down rookie season for a linebacker. It's really hard for these linebackers to make an impact right away. But I don't want to say Kenneth Murray can't get a lot of depth in his drops, because there was the one play against the Chiefs in that Week 4 game where he was running, doing his back pedals and keeping up with Tyreek Hill on a deep crossing route. So I do think it's in there for Kenneth Murray, and people rave about his sort of football IQ and leadership. So I don't think the role that he's going to play is going to be very similar to Devin White. The defenses are really, they're both 3-4 defenses, but as far as the scheme, Devin White with Bruce Arians and what Brandon Staley is going to bring to the Chargers, they couldn't be any more different. The Bucs run a very aggressive, kind of man-oriented defense, and Devin White was able to be kind of the patrol man in the middle of the field, like I described, with Levante David being more of that deeper zone linebacker. Whereas the Chargers, they're going to have a very safety-oriented defense that's a much more conservative defense. So I do think Kenneth Murray is going to play a lot of traditional cover the middle of the field linebacking stuff. And if he can do what he did, consistently getting depth, like that one play that just flashes with me with Kenneth Murray, I think he is going to have a really good season in that system, because they might be able to simplify things for him and really let Derwin James kind of handle that deep middle slot and kind of mix in maybe Adderley and some of those other safeties as more of those high safety positions. Think of John Jenkins being upgraded with Derwin James there. But I do think Kenneth Murray's going to have a good season. But I don't think that he's going to be utilized like Devin White. I actually see him playing more of a traditional cover linebacker role in this system. And I think he can handle it if he really studies his assignment and kind of understands risk management and when he can go, when he needs to stay back, what his role is on each play against each route combination. It's just super hard for these young linebackers. But I like Kenneth Murray moving forward, and I think Brandon Staley is pretty damn excited to have that type of athlete in the middle of the field too. Okay, from NBA Kingdom, how have the Ravens had sustained success over the last 2 decades with mediocre QB play? Defense. Defense and culture, line play, scheme. I mean, they're the definition of culture mattering and being able to put their players in the best position to succeed. I mean, they've had, I would say, relative to the rest of the league over the last let's just say the last decade, relative to the rest of the league, they've had above average quarterback play. Like Lamar Jackson's been, for all of my criticisms of him, he's been well above average really since he was drafted, and the way that they scheme him up and the culture that they've put around Lamar Jackson is the absolute pinnacle of answering your question as far as maximizing guys' skill sets and finding a specific path of how they're going to win. But even Joe Flacco, he definitely faded out, but he was still an above average quarterback. No, he wasn't elite like people made all those jokes, but he was still above average. So like they've had pretty good starting caliber quarterback play, pretty stable, and they've built around them. That's been their MO, and that's my answer to your question. Thanks for the question. All right, from Tyler P. It's moving a little slow here. There we go. X's and O's question. I know you said that 12 teams run the Shanahan outside zone offense. What are some of the other offensive schemes that NFL teams use? Kind of briefly rattle off those schemes. Appreciate your content and consideration. Good question. So I'm just collecting my thoughts here. I would say that outside of the Shanahan offense, more or less, the way I see it, is there's about 2 other schemes from a broad point of view that when you really dial into like the types of route combinations they run, the types of runs they like to do, they're going to vary more or less. But you've got your Shanahan offense, which is play action, outside zone, bootlegs, vertical shots, on like deep crossing routes and stuff, misdirection. That's one. And then you have sort of your West Coast quick hitting passing game, and that's going to be your Andy Reid sort of, Matt Nagy, what Doug Peterson ran. This is going to be a lot of easy stuff being schemed up for the quarterback and basically trying to get your quick passing game on early downs to become your running game. So just like I mentioned with the Chiefs, RPOs, nice screens, slant flat combinations. That's going to be your original sort of Bill Walsh West Coast concepts, and that's definitely replicated around the league. I would say, we have the 12 teams that run the Shanahan offenses. Of the 24 teams left, I would say almost everyone has some combination of those West Coast offenses. But then you're going to have some teams that are a little more traditional, not quite as West Coast. Teams that are going to run a lot more like 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, a lot more power offense, more traditional play action from the pocket. And that's going to be more of your traditional pro-style offense. But that's the offense that's really dying off. The Seahawks do that a lot, but now the Seahawks are going to the Shanahan offense. The Cowboys kind of ran that before this new era, back before they hired Kellen Moore, but that's kind of died off. So that's a lot harder to find. I would say the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would fit that mold of much more traditional pro-style. And it's the approach is similar to the Shanahan offense, where it's like we're going to run on early downs and we want to take vertical shots. That's kind of the traditional pro philosophy from like the 80s and the 90s. But it's just getting, the West Coast philosophies have kind of taken over. And there's still some of the, it's not ironic that it's teams like Seattle and Dallas with Jason Garrett, a little more old school, Tampa Bay with an older coach and Bruce Arians. It's not a coincidence that those are the teams that are doing some of those more traditional offenses. So that's really, from a broad spectrum, kind of the breakdown right now. I would say the majority of the league is running some variation of a West Coast offense that wants to simplify the passing game with RPOs, screens, quick passes on early downs, run a lot of inside zone out of shotgun, and that's like the majority of the league is your West Coast offense. And the Cardinals are a great example as well of a West Coast style offense, although it's a very modern version with the air raid concepts. So that's from a broad lens, kind of the 3 schemes that I break down, and then there's tons of different little trees underneath each scheme. Okay, from Loomer Cooper. Man, the mailbag is loading slow today. This is just a fun question, but could you explain how Lions trolled you? He says he's the OG TFG troll, so I always wondered. Yes, Lions is the original TFG troll. He's been around for a long time. He's got a mailbag question coming up here in about 10 questions. So shout out to Alex Hutchinson, Lions. He's kind of graduated from being a troll, but he was the original guy that would kind of pester me about my bad takes and was kind of annoying on Twitter. But I think he's evolved, and me and Lions are tight right now. But yeah, I will give Lions the official OG TFG troll title, and I don't think that's ever going to go away. REA Beats. It seems Bronco fans are in for another year of Drew Lock, aka another year of mediocrity. What would you do if I was the GM there? What do they need to do to get good? Yeah, man, the Broncos are in a tough spot. I thought, God, they should have freaking gone for Stafford. Stafford there would have written all of their wrongs. I don't think Trey Lance is going to come in and like save the day there. I mean, if they could get Fields, that'd be awesome. With his accuracy, that'd be great, but I don't think that's very realistic. Mac Jones isn't going to be like a big upgrade there. He doesn't have a very strong arm to unlock that offense. I would have been calling about Wentz. I would have made the deal that the Eagles made for Wentz in a heartbeat if I was the Broncos. Maybe a call about Darnold. I don't know if they're going to save Darnold, but that's probably at this point. Now that you missed out on Stafford, you missed out on Wentz, I wish that I didn't if I was the GM there, but I'd be making calls about Darnold now because just you have all these speedy receivers. You got veteran defense in place, although that might be if Von Miller's getting released, they let AJ Boye go. They don't have Justin Simmons under contract right now. That could be falling apart, but man, it's just a bummer because they have one of the most explosive groups of playmakers in the league. Their offensive line's not great, but it could be a lot worse. But I guess, yeah, I'd be on to calling about Sam Darnold. And if the Jets want to stand by Sam Darnold, what can I do to get up and get Zach Wilson at number 2? Is there anything we could work out with the Jets there? You know, maybe you send them Jerry Jeudy and the 9th pick to go get Zach Wilson. Maybe. I don't know. That'd be an interesting move. I would hate to part from Jerry Jeudy, but getting that quarterback is much more important. Okay, from my favorite name, Jaganathan Srinath. He says, great job pronouncing my name. So I'm assuming I got it with the Srinath. You'll have to let me know one more time. But you got my favorite name, man. Crushing it with the name game here. How do you see the tight end position evolving in the future? Do you think great receivers / average blocker types will dominate, or will it be a true need for a clear do-it-all kind of guy like Prime Gronk, Kittle? Also, what do I think of Kyle Pitts' blocking ability? I don't think the traditional tight end is going anywhere. I just think that teams are opening their minds about how to use some of these more versatile tight ends that maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have had much of a role. Guys like Pitts, what's his name in Las Vegas? Darren Waller. You've got, obviously, what the Chiefs do with Travis Kelce as a lot of a receiver. The Dolphins with Mike Gesicki. Teams are realizing that you can put these guys out in the slot. You can flex them out wide. Like, they can run routes like receivers, but they're too fast for linebackers. They're too tall for corners. And some of these receivers can, like, shake the best corners in the league. Some of these tight ends can shake the best corners in the league. We saw Travis Kelce in the AFC divisional round literally break Denzel Ward's ankles on an out route. It was an out route. It's just crazy what these guys can do. And you got to keep in mind when defenses are when they're deciding who goes on the field, they look at the personnel in the huddle, and that determines what package on defense they're going to use. So when you see say Kittle in there, it's like, okay, they're a threat to come out under center and run the ball. We got to make sure we have the size in the box to, handle the run game. But then they take the formation and all of a sudden they're an empty, and you're stuck having to put a linebacker on either a running back or a tight end. So that's kind of the way that the NFL is going, is being able to create those mind games and those mismatch problems. That's when you hear mismatch problem. Well, it's because of what they can do to screw up the way that you have to account your formations. But it doesn't mean that blocking tight ends are phasing out. Because I think with, like, in Miami's case, teams kind of know, like, okay, Mike Gesicki's not much of a blocker. So that limits a little bit of the game planning there. But as far as Kyle Pitts is concerned, he definitely is going to be somewhere between Mike Gesicki and Travis Kelce. But he's still very young. I think he might beef up and become a better blocker. That does become a question of how much does that limit his route running. So it's going to be finding that balance. I think Kyle Pitts is going to be very good blocking in space if you line him up in that slot receiver route, and he's a primary blocker on like bubble screens or outside zones as kind of the second tight end who's maybe more of that flex H-back type of tight end who's playing off the line of scrimmage, not the one that with his hand actually in the dirt. But I think he's going to be effective as a blocker, but I would rather him stay light and quick and fast and be that receiver mismatch that he is than focus a ton on beefing up and becoming a guy that can block defensive ends, because you can run two tight end packages and get a, let's just say Adam Shaheen to Mike Gesicki, where Shaheen's the blocker, but then Kyle Pitts is your primary receiving tight end. So that's kind of the state of the tight end market in the NFL, if you will. From Ashbro Mace, it's another Drew Lock question, so probably going to glance over this one. Assuming the Broncos don't draft a QB or trade for a guy like Watson. Yeah, Watson's the other thing there. Could the Broncos end up in a QB purgatory situation like the Bears and the football team? Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, we kind of talked about that earlier in the show with Jalen Hurts. I mean, if he develops a little bit and he's the 22nd best quarterback in the NFL, you could all of a sudden be sitting there like, what do we do? Do we pay this guy a contract extension? Do we just trade him and, blow it all up and risk having a really bad starter? It's hard. Quarterback's tough, man. It's really tough. That's why I like the Colts trade so much. From George, I don't know if there's a mailbag question or not. These are loading slowly. I'll just answer this. How did I get into the position I'm in today as a PFF analyst and somebody who really knows the sport well? I'm a high schooler and just wondering how you would suggest starting out. I do get that question a lot, as you said. But real quick, just from your position as a high schooler, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have that question. I would highly recommend applying to work for PFF. You have to be over 18. But pff.com/jobs, it's all self-taught, and if you do well enough, if you kind of know the sport and can figure it out, self-taught, you pass the test, you get a quick interview, and it's a great opportunity to work, get a job in sports and start kind of networking a little bit. I also I wrote for free for, fansided.com. Once I got to college, I was in the sports business club, started networking there. So that's just some of the stuff I did. But it's all about just finding jobs in sports, usually not going to make a lot of money doing it, and staying on the grind and really studying the game and having a passion for the game and continuously working at it. So that's what I got for you, George. Thanks for the question. Stuart McAdams, one last thing on the high schooler thing. Since you are younger than I was when I started getting jobs in sports, I would recommend, if you go to college, to try and work somewhere in the athletic department. Like freshman year, I don't even care if it's a janitor or anything, but I think you could probably get a better gig than that. But just go into the athletic department and say, hey, I want a job somewhere. I don't really care what it is. I want to work in sports. I'm willing to work hard. Who can I talk to? And then you just start building networks through there. So that's another thing I would suggest. Stuart McAdams asks, the Steelers have negative cap space this year, but have over $150 million next year. Do I see impending free agents like Juju, Villanueva, Hilton taking deals where the majority of their salary is deferred to next year? Would they be willing to do that to stay with the Steelers? Keep up the great work. Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of that this year across the league is guys signing extensions, but like the first year they might have a really low base salary, and then the next year it's boom, like you're making tons of money. You don't want to do too much of that because if those guys don't work out, you can get kind of screwed. Like if Villanueva at his age really regresses, you're kind of stuck. Or if Juju again isn't like great and he has like a $28 million cap hit next year, you could kind of get stuck with that. So you do got to be careful doing it for too many players. But I do think we'll see a lot of that across the league, not just the Steelers. From Lions. Hey, Marcus. Hope you're doing good. So I have two questions. How come your QB tier list, you had Stafford ranked 15th or so, but on Madden roster, he's ranked like 7th? And then, well, I'll just answer that, and then I'll read the next one. I say this all the time, but my Madden ratings are not reflective of my actual quarterback ratings because Madden has a formula. All I'm doing is plugging in individual attributes, and it comes out with an overall. Like Tom Brady, I think, is now tied for QB3, and I wouldn't say he's QB4 with Watson, and I wouldn't say he's as good as Deshaun Watson. It's just Madden's got a formula. There's only so much I can do about it. So that's my answer there. Stafford, he might be missing that little extra it factor on the field, but where do I plug that in? I'm not going to give him like crappy awareness. He's pretty accurate. He's got a strong arm. He's pretty athletic. Like as far as his Madden rating goes, like he's just going to come out well in their formula. So that's my answer there. What should the Lions do at 7? Trade down, draft Lance, draft Parsons? Well, I did just put out my most recent what I would do mock draft, but the Lions are in a really tough position. I had them taking Rashawn Slater. I think if they can trade down, you do it. It does take two to tango, so it's sometimes easier said than done. That might mean trading to like Minnesota to come get Trey Lance, and you have to weigh the odds of like, what does that look like if we let the Vikings take Trey Lance instead of us taking Trey Lance? I don't think the Lions are in a position to take Trey Lance, but that might be a great trade down partner for them. But are you willing to do that interdivision? I don't know. But I definitely would look to trade down if I'm the Lions. And then you just go best player available, whether it's Parsons or Slater or Darrisaw or whatever. But or Waddle. They're in a really, really tough spot. They're easily the hardest team to draft for with that 7th pick in the top 10. From Hunt, what scheme does Lou? That's the second Lou Anarumo. Wait, no, that was the. Now I'm confused because this question is what scheme does Lou Anarumo, the D coordinator for the Bengals, run? And in your mock, you're the Bengals taking Chase. Isn't his skill set very similar to T. Higgins? Because someone in the last question was asking Lou Anarumo, the offensive line coach. So I'm unsure about that. Where did Lou Anarumo come from? I can talk about what I think he might run. Let's figure this out. Lou Anarumo. Okay, so he is the defensive coordinator. He's from Staten Island, New York. So he is coming from... Oh, he's been there. He was their defense coordinator last year. So, I mean, I'm not going to act like I've done a deep dive into the Bengals defense, but they are a 4-3 base. They run. Let me pull up their coverages, I guess. 1 second. I think they run a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 4. A pretty basic 4-3 defense. I don't think they're all that inspired. Let me see. Cincinnati. Yeah, they ran. Yeah, a lot of. They're basically they're like Zimmer's defense. Their splits are almost identical, actually, as I pull this up, to Mike Zimmer's defense. So a healthy combination of different coverages. They ran a little more man coverage than the Vikings did, but that makes sense because they signed the 2 Vikings defensive backs in free agency. So yeah, they run the Zimmer 4-3 defense that is just a nice combination of zone coverages. They mix in some man. It's just a balanced 4-3 defense. And then the Bengals taking Chase, isn't he a very similar skill set to T. Higgins? Not really. He can do some of the things T. Higgins does, but Chase is much more effective over the middle of the field, slants, crossing routes, screens, run after catch machine. And I think T. Higgins is never going to be a dominant number 1 receiver. I think he can be a very good number 2. Think like Mike Williams. But Jamar Chase can be that number 1 guy that is the focal point of your offense. And then T. Higgins is just kind of the your second option to win some of those tough balls, to stack guys on the outside. I think there's absolutely room for those 2. And then you have Tyler Boyd. So all 3 of those guys would mesh really well together, in my opinion. Sorry for the on-the-fly research there on Lou Anarumo. I guess now I know who he is. He's the guy that implemented the Mike Zimmer scheme in Cincinnati after they let go of Marvin Lewis, who was running. I guess it's not the Mike Zimmer scheme. It's the Marvin Lewis scheme that Mike Zimmer has made famous, is probably the way I should be saying that. Okay, from Jeremy. With the Saints cap issues, could I see Marshawn Lattimore being traded? Yeah, anything's on the table for the Saints. I think the only guys off the board are going to be Ramczyk, Kamara, Eric McCoy. That's pretty much it. Probably not going to. Well, yeah, anyone I think is an option to get moved there for New Orleans. I have no idea what direction New Orleans is going to go. They are probably the team I have the least idea what's happening, because their cap situation's so crazy. From Bryce Chapman, it's a Madden question. Is it possible to upload your roster in a franchise that starts at Super Bowl week, or do you have to force win every game to get the right and trade to get all the right picks? Yeah, you unfortunately have to do some work if you want to use my roster for franchise. You got to force all the wins and stuff. But what I recommend doing is do an offline franchise and then save a base file, and then set everything up, do the force wins, do the trades, get everything in place, and then keep that as it is, and then save a different file on top of that with whatever rebuild you're going to start, and then you can go from there. And then anytime you want to start a new rebuild, you can just go back to that base. You don't have to do all that work again. So you don't have to do the work. It's like 2-3 hours of work to get all that crap ready, but you only have to do it once, and then you're good to go. And then if you're on next gen, you can't do that right now, but I am going to start work on that roster. So after the draft, you'll be able to do that for next gen. Okay, from JOR, loading up. If the Raiders can get good value trading Carr, would it make sense to trade Carr, then use the draft capital to trade up to get Lance? So you're starting Mariota for a year and developing Lance under him. It's not a bad plan. It's definitely not a bad plan, but I think you could it'd probably be better to just trade Mariota, to be honest. Just trade Mariota, and I think you'll be able to move up for Lance. I'm not so sure that Trey Lance is going to be a top 10 pick. Maybe he will, but I think, like Detroit, like I think you could give, if you're willing to part with your first next year, you could give your first and move up with like Detroit or someone else, maybe the Cowboys at 10. You can go up and get Trey Lance. And I would rather stick with Carr because you're going to be pretty good with Carr. You could probably get a second-round pick back for Mariota. Maybe a third for Mariota, but I'd probably rather do that as much as I'm not a huge Derek Carr guy. Because I don't think maybe you get a first for Derek Carr, but that was not a mailbag question. Okay. From Royal Awesome. We got about 5 questions left here. What are the easiest ways to identify all the different defensive formations like 1, 2, 3, 4? We've gotten a lot of these questions. Oh, you're talking about defensive coverages. Defensive coverages like cover 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at the safeties. So there's 2 questions you got to ask. Is it zone coverage or man coverage? And then you have to ask, what are the safeties doing? So now there's a lot of disguises, and I can't just train you how to identify coverages in a 2-minute answer here, but in a nutshell, first thing you're going to look at is the middle of the field open or is it closed? Open means you've got 2 safeties high, basically. And then closed is you've got one high kind of protected in the middle of the field. So your closed middle of the fields, where you have 1 safety up top, is going to be cover 1 or cover 3. And then you've got your open middle of the fields, and cover 1 is going to be man coverage, and cover 3 is zone coverage. Your open middle of the field, where you have 2 high safeties, is either going to be cover 2 or cover 4. Or cover 6, cover 9. There's different. Again, we're not going to get too in-depth here, but for the most part, that's how you're looking at it. Closed middle of the field is cover 1 or cover 3. Open middle of the field is going to be cover 2, cover 4. Again, tons of rotation. It's never that simple, but the gist of it is that. And then you just got to find out, is it man coverage or is it zone coverage? Easiest way to tell that is, A, if there's motion. If there's pre-snap motion, you can see one guy go from one side of the field all the way to the other side of the field. Most likely man coverage. I think teams have started to disguise some of that a little bit because it was becoming a little overkill to determine for the quarterback if it was man or zone, but still probably a pretty good indicator if it's man or zone. The other way to tell is I like to look at some of those kind of weak side linebackers because or the slot corners, usually you can tell like that's kind of the spot that I would say is a giveaway. If any of the receivers or the running backs or the tight ends are running to the flat, you're going to see one of those guys, they're going to bolt. They're going to bolt to the flat to cover that guy if it's man coverage. If it's zone, you're going to see everyone kind of drop back, keep their eye on the quarterback. So again, if you have open middle of the field, let's just say after the snap, because there's all sorts of confusion before the snap, like they'll show single high, and then after the snap, they'll rotate to cover 2. So let's just say after the snap, if you see 2 deep safeties, it's either cover 2 or cover 4, and it could be cover 2 zone or cover 2 man. And then if it's just one high safety after the snap, it's cover 1 or cover 3. And then you get into like cover 6, cover 9. That's where you're going to have cover 2 on one side of the field, cover 4 on the other side of the field. It can get really complicated, but that's a brief rundown. But there's obviously much more depth we could go into on that. From Greg Grom. Oh, not mailbag. I got to come back to that. Okay. From Spencer, should I be worried that the Eagles will take Trey Lance? We've been notorious to overreact, overcorrect. Example, Chip Kelly to Doug Peterson. So it makes sense that To combat turnovers, we take a guy that didn't have any interceptions. Well, I don't know if you're necessarily worried if you take Trey Lance. Like, I could think of worse opportunities for him. I mean, taking Trey Lance, probably I'd be more opportunistic about their future than if they stuck by Jalen Hurts. So I wouldn't be too worried if they take Trey Lance. It's definitely a risk, but I think that's probably a better option than standing by Hurts, in my opinion. And then the last question here from Brandon Cosby. After giving up the third rounder this year for the Wentz trade, he came in knowing I was going to do this show. How likely do you think it is that Ballard trades out of 21 to collect more picks? We know Ballard loves his day 2 picks. It just is going to depend. I think if they have a left tackle that they really like at 21, I think they go there. Or if you got like J.C. Horn or some like really good player sitting there, but I think it'll be a day of thing where if they like what they got, they'll take it. Otherwise, they'll trade down. But I would say there's a good chance. Yeah, if they don't love someone there at 21, I think there's a good chance they trade down. All right, there's the mailbag. Thank you so much for your questions, everyone. Thanks for watching the show. Hope you enjoyed. And I'm out for the weekend. I'm going to have a couple of film rooms up on Patreon tomorrow, but we'll see you guys next week for some more great draft content as we lead up to the draft. We got pro days starting to pick up here in a couple weeks, so looking forward to that. But hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you guys later. Peace.